Australian Institute of Marine Science up for our next talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. So my name is Deb. This is my colleague Kevin and our co-author Dr. Mark Gibbs, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Kevin and I are part of the Translation to Deployment team in the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. I'd just like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners and the elders past, present and emerging on the lands that we meet today, but also essentially the length of the Queensland coast where this work either has been or will be carried out in future. I knew from a very young age that marine biology was the gig for me because I loved the ocean and I loved animals. Pete Mumby gave an anecdote earlier in the day that marine biology wasn't always something that was looked up to, and I remember the career counsellor at high school telling me marine biologists were to scientists what teacher aides were to teachers, and that I didn't really want to get into that industry. But it didn't put me off, and here I am today. So Bob gave a great overview of RRAP this morning, so I don't need to, other than to say there's been a large number of people and organisations working very hard on a lot of reef interventions over the past few years. So RRAP has been working for about the last 4 years on developing the intervention science, but now we're at a stage where we need to develop and test the production and deployment supply chains to see if we can take this from R&D into interventions to deployment onto the reef to build resilience. And the way we're going to do that is through the 2025 to 2029 pilot deployments. So RRAP was initially recommended to be a 10-year R&D program. We're about 4 years into that program now, and we're sort of about to split off so that the R&D will continue in parallel with our pilot scale deployments. So the Translation to Deployment team has been working on how we're going to turn this research and translate it into deployable interventions, and now most of our team is going to be moving into managing these pilot scale deployments over the next few years. So initially we're going to start our pilot deployments with 2 interventions, which I'll talk about in a moment briefly, but over time as we move through deployments with the R&D continuing, we're expecting additional interventions to come online. So the deployment objectives, the main outcome is really to develop and test the production and deployment supply chains. So to make sure that we can scale up these interventions that have been developed through the R&D into something that can be deployable on the reef. So to do that, we'll be testing the processes, methods and technologies, gaining further R&D learnings regarding the intervention methods, further understanding the ecological benefits, refining our engagement and decision processes, building further knowledge on future governance and management needs, and we're going to start developing our operational capability through partnering with industry. So there's been some discussion around scale. As we're building up scale from R&D to full deployment, we need to start building capacity outside of our research teams to be able to hit the scales that we're planning to. So pilot deployments will be focused across 3 regions. The northern region, which is roughly centred around Cairns, where there will initially be some capacity building, and then in this region deployments will be run by industry. The central region, which is centred around Townsville, will be initially researcher-led, and the southern region will be traditional owner-led. So as I mentioned, we're starting off with 2 interventions, conservation aquaculture and slick capture and larval release, which if you've been to some of the talks today talking about moving corals, that's the same method. So I'm just going to talk about these really briefly, more from a definition perspective. If you missed the workshop yesterday on scaling up interventions that really ran into these methods, you missed out because it was a great workshop. So slick capture and larval release, the corals spawn naturally on the reef, and then the spawn's collected from the water surface, transferred into net enclosures for larval development, and then the larvae can either be settled onto tiles or devices and deployed onto the reef that way, or deployed as a cloud by opening up the net and releasing the larva. Conservation aquaculture occurs in an aquaculture facility where spawning, fertilisation and larva culture occur. The larvae are then settled onto tiles. Then there's some optionality around inoculation with symbionts, probiotics for improved diets, and other technologies that are under development. The corals have a brief grow up in the facility, and then the tile fragments with the juvenile corals are inserted into the deployment devices, which you can see on the reef there, and deployed.
Thank you, Deb. I'm Kevin. I'm the Industry Development Lead in RRAP and AIMS. And let me just say it was great to hear the Reef Authority employee earlier today who's also from Minnesota. So shout out to landlocked people from Minnesota. It's very cold, -40 in the winter. Nothing like it is here, but I am shivering at the moment. It's quite cold. So part of the pilot deployment opportunity, hey, you know, Townsville's a cold place, right? Part of the pilot deployment opportunities that we have for industry is to help us scale the production and the larval settlements with the CAD opportunities that we have. And so we have here, well, I think some of you might have been in the workshops yesterday. We met Michaela, and we have some of the coral spat there in the tanks. But we need to harvest the slicks, we need to be able to deploy the coral, and we need to be able to monitor them. So the opportunities that we have moving forward for the future for the RRAP Interventions really do, like we heard throughout the day, allow us to partner with all sorts of industries we'll get to here in later slides, including yours.
Thank you. So as we're moving into pilot deployments, there's obviously quite a few considerations. One of them is procurement process, so we'll be complying with the Commonwealth Government's procurement guidelines, as AIMS is a Commonwealth Government entity. There's commercial arrangements, so as the lead contractor, AIMS will have individual contracts with our partners. IP provisions, so a lot of the R&D that's been developed by RRAP is open access. And as we move forward, any partners that we work with that come up with further refinements or other innovations, that'll be covered through contractual agreements, how that will work. The environmental approvals will initially be held by AIMS, and we'll be supervising work conducted under those permits. But moving forward, there may be the opportunity or incentive for partners who are motivated to do so to gain their own approvals, but we'll need to work through that as we move down the line. QA/QC will be undertaken by AIMS. As we're the lead contractor and we hold the environmental approvals, AIMS will be ultimately responsible for activities covered during the pilot deployments.
So we were fortunate enough to be expanding in the pilot deployment team and the translation to deployment team, and part of that is our ever-increasing collaboration with industry partners. So this past February, we were able to hold an industry briefing day at AIMS. Some of you in the audience here today were there. It was attended by members of the aquaculture industry, the coral collectors, and we had some of the charter boat industry representatives there as well. We had to start with a baseline of kind of what RRAP even is. We need to make sure that everyone we'll be working with in the future not only knows what RRAP is, but what AIMS is. We then expanded into kind of what we've done. We brought the scientists into the room to let them explain all of our methodologies and then where we would be going in the future. So Deb and I have just recently started at AIMS to be able to move this R&D now into the deployment phase. When we are initially growing all these corals for the conservation aquaculture technique, at the sea simulator, we are currently expanding, but given our rate of expansion and our need to deploy and grow these corals out onto the reef, we will, and we have forecasted this out, quickly realize that we will not have the capacity at the sea simulator to be able to hold or even grow all of these corals that we need to spawn and then settle and then get out the door and deploy across the Great Barrier Reef. And so we realize that we'll need to have industry participation, albeit from the coral collectors to the aquaculture facilities to a new industry that we're hoping to assist and develop, which will be the reef restoration industry across Queensland and the Great Barrier Reef. So how their plans can fit into our own and RRAP's and all of the plans that we've heard today is really an ongoing story that I hope that we have another one of these meetings, hopefully in 3 to 4 years. We can see how all this is progressing. But hopefully we can create these future partnerships with a hope that we have and can create a restoration industry here in Australia. And I hand it back over to Deb.
Cool. So I'm not going to go too much into the methods about boats for corals because there is a plenary in this room very shortly, which will talk about boats for corals. But it provides an example of one of the ways that we're starting to build capacity in industry to help deploy these interventions. So the project has been jointly led by AIMS and Southern Cross University, and Peter Harrison has a presentation later in the week that will cover some of this. The project's been funded through the Great Barrier Reef Foundation's Reef Island Initiative, and the project's main focus is active capacity building of traditional owners, tourism operators and local resource managers within the Whitsundays to carry out the slick capture lava release method, or the moving corals method. So one of the key considerations we've heard about in some of the other presentations today, this sort of collaborative project, is managing the safety considerations when you're working with multiple organisations who have varying safety policies and requirements. So that was something that we had to consider really carefully between the different organisations participating. So in the picture there, you can see there's 3 different tourism operator boats there, and you've seen some of them already today, and an AIMS vessel, and then everyone working together. We're pulling up one of the larval nets out of the pools to release the larvae out the bottom. So doing a cloud release there of our larvae that are ready to settle, and hopefully we now have lots of babies. That was just in November last year, so hopefully now we have lots of babies growing on the reefs there. So the aim now is to use this model of bringing local operators together to work together to scale up deployment across other areas in the GBR, so we can start putting more baby corals on more reefs.
Thank you, Deb. I think it was Matt from DQ earlier who said we needed to collaborate until it hurts, so I definitely agreed with that, and that resonated with me. So we'll be expanding here in the Cairns region here this coming spawning season. In order to kind of build capacity, we actually need to do capacity building. So we'll be using kind of a hybrid slick capture and release methodology along with some of our CAD technology, it's our aquaculture technology, to go ahead and harvest the slicks. We'll rear these larvae in tanks, and we'll settle them onto the CAD devices that you might have heard about already today or in other rooms, and then deploy these devices and then monitor. And then in future years, as we move into the pilot deployment programs, we'll be expanding our cooperation with more and more industry partners, and we'll be expanding this methodology and the partnerships in the Cairns region. One of our other technologies I wanted to briefly mention, and like my coworker said earlier to me, like we're standing on the shoulders of giants here. Deb and I just have the honor of being able to present some of this work. We have the Reef Seed Containerized Spawning System that was recently funded through a CORDAP grant. And we're going to be able to, here's a sketch I think from a couple months ago now, but produce about 4 million larvae per year across 4 species initially. And this would be a containerized spawning system that will go ahead and be able to deploy in various regions that it might be needed in across the GBR and elsewhere in the potential in the world. So just to reiterate the timelines here, in the next steps in the short term, we have the Cairns 2024 capacity building. And in the medium term, we have these pilot deployment programs that are between 2025 and basically the 2030 or 2029. And then ongoing after, hopefully, all of this is successful, we'll have an ongoing delivery of these interventions, and along with the continued R&D outputs from the second tranche of funding. And with that, I want to summarize by saying the pilot deployment commences and the scaling up of RRAP Innovations are starting now. The deployments will be overseen by AIMS and conducted by contractors. The RRAP T2D, or the Translation to Deployment team, has been engaging and building the capacity in external providers. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Deb and I. We have our email addresses there and phone numbers, and you can email Mark as well. Thank you very much.